Story 1. Because we do not all live 2.5 hours from the capital. Story 2. The police and military can use force. No labor rights, so goodbye job. Health insurance is tied to your job, goodbye health insurance. The only thing I think we can do is protest businesses by not buying their products or trying to unionize. But getting enough people to join together is a tough task. Story 3. Something I've heard that makes sense is that the country is huge, so it would take more to get something done, not including things like guns and labor laws. Story 4. Just saw an article that claims Americans have the second highest discretionary spending power in the world. On average, they are probably too comfortable to complain. Story 5. I think it is important to realize France is roughly 18 times smaller than the United States. You have to realize how big of an area it is. Uniting this big of a population is an incredible task. Story 6. Americans often seem to approach protests differently due to a variety of factors like geographical spread, work culture, and legal framework differences. For instance, the United States is massive, making nationwide coordination tough, and many Americans cannot afford to take time off work. Additionally, the French have a long history of protest as a direct method of political engagement. It is really about differing national identities and societal structures. Story 7. The richest country in the world protesting for change is surprising. The average American is wealthier than the average person in any other country in the world. We do not protest because we actually have it really, really good. Story 8. We will lose our jobs. There is no federally mandated paid time off. The average salaried employee gets 10 days off each year, and there are no protections for missing work to go protest. It is perfectly legal to fire someone because they missed work for a protest. Our health insurance is tied to our jobs. No job, no health insurance. If you have anything other than perfect health, this is a huge risk. It is also perfectly legal for our police officers to shoot us. Story 9. The last major French protest that gained attention on social media was a complete failure. Not only did it not prevent what they were protesting against, but it also caused a significant amount of property damage for taxpayers to help clean up. Most protests do very little other than make the attendees feel good about themselves. Story 10. We're too domesticated. We're a type of people that will gladly endure hardship if people we've been convinced not to like are also suffering. We've been raised not to even realize other countries could possibly do anything better than we can. Story 11. Because at the core of it all, despite some complaining on social media, Americans are a dangerous combination of optimistic, complacent, and willfully ignorant people who refuse to believe that any one person could destroy the democracy created by our Constitution. As a whole, they don't worry about losing it, trusting they, unnamed, unidentified, unknown, will stop any really bad stuff from happening. Americans have never faced a risk to our democracy, so they mistakenly believe everything will be okay always and forever because some unseen hand of justice or God has protected us from it. That's precisely why we risk losing it. Story 12. Because the Supreme Court of the United States neutered the right to peacefully assemble, Americans no longer have that right. Courts have consistently held that the government can prevent peaceful assembly by requiring a number of frivolous permits. Also, courts have said police officers can slaughter protesters without cause. They are also free to illegally arrest the ones they didn't kill. Americans can't protest anymore. My local city showed up and tear-gassed peaceful protesters because they were still lingering in the park after their permit expired. The police faced zero consequences while numerous protesters were arrested. Story 13. I think that we are complacent. I don't think that most people in the United States understand what is happening with the overthrow of our system of self-governance. And the people who consider themselves patriots are complicit. Story 14. Couple reasons I can think of. 1. As many have mentioned, work. Paid time off is not something employers are required to give here in the United States, and even requesting unpaid time off, they might just say no. If you go anyway and get fired, there is a lack of social safety nets and you are basically in trouble unless you are able to find something else on short notice. A lot of us are just tired, plain and simple. Wages have not kept up with inflation or cost of living, which means that people like myself who used to live semi-comfortably now live basically paycheck to paycheck. One emergency can wipe out our savings, which means many of us have to work longer hours and get second or even third jobs. Add on to that a hyper-individualistic culture where you are expected to work, keep house and cook all by yourself, maybe with the help of a partner or spouse if you are lucky, and you just do not have the time or energy to go out and fight. All of this is by design. Americans are kept tired, poor, and uneducated so we cannot fight for our rights. And again, a hyper-individualized culture means many who do have the resources to fight do not. Very much an I got mine, so forget you situation. Story 15. Aside from living on the other side of the country, they have more guns and they will absolutely use lethal means of crowd dispersal. The police exist to protect the rich, not us. Story 16. America is huge. France is much smaller. It would be like organizing all of Europe to come together and plan an effective protest. We're too far apart, too divided, too big. If we could do it, get enough people together and organize efficiently, we could change everything. Story 17. Too distracted with a culture war between each other, we only engage in performative activism. We are too lazy to do anything that actually makes a difference. Story 18. We'll lose our jobs, which exhaust us so much on purpose, leaving us without any energy or hope. The little rage we can muster is posted on social media, which is an illusion for change. It's how they control us. I would love to see a real revolt, a general strike, pitchforks at the Capitol, but we live paycheck to paycheck, and what little healthcare we have is also tied to work. It's so demoralizing. I hate this country with every fiber of my being, but guess what? I can't afford to leave. Story 19, they have. But the biggest driver is often that the authorities rarely ever sympathize with the cause for protest. As a matter of fact, in most cases, they will be all too happy to crush skulls and lock up those liberal hippies. France is also a geographically smaller nation with strong brother-sisterhood bonds and strong unions that support each other. If a union kicks off a protest against a government policy, then 6 other major unions will hop in to help out in a heartbeat. 50-plus years of not very union-friendly business practices being permitted by United States governments have made union membership rarer than ever. This has also made it so that the masses simply cannot afford to not work for long periods of time. The hustle culture is more important than being able to have paid maternity leave. Gotta work to get money to eat, live, party, travel. In Canada, we suffer a hybrid effect of this. Our country is so vast that there can be a crisis and protest going on for weeks in another province, and no one in the next province overhears about it. In general, when a nationwide union walks off the job, like postal workers or Teamsters, people are just pissed off at the inconvenience more so than being sympathetic to the fight the workers are having. We suffer the same in that many police forces are not sympathetic to the causes. The only time in recent history this happened was in February 2022, and only because they were sympathetic to the cause. It took basically our federal government to enable emergency powers for them to deal with it because the 2 bodies of government below, provincial and to an extent municipal, chose not to deal with it since the protest made our federal government look bad, not politically aligned. Story 20. Because our corporate overlords have us in a difficult position, our healthcare is tied to our jobs. There are almost no worker protections. You can be fired for almost any reason at any time with no recourse. Unemployment benefits are insufficient, and there's no way you can live off them. So if you go out and protest, which is your right as an American, it's likely you'll get fired, especially if you make the news or have an unpopular opinion. 40% of Americans have less than $400 in savings and are a couple of missed paychecks away from homelessness. So unless you've got absolutely nothing to lose, you can't afford to protest. Story 21. I want to say it's because my country is too darn large. Everything is spread out and takes a while for any effects to be felt. If America was shrunk down, that probably would cause a French Revolution reenactment. Story 22. Protest does not have a great track record of actually accomplishing things in the United States. Mostly, change happens here after a huge tragedy, not some boring, interminable protest that's happening 2,000 miles away. Story 23. 1. Cannot get a day off work to protest. Could afford it if we could anyhow. The country is too big. Nobody can afford to get somewhere to protest anywhere that matters in large enough numbers. Story 24. If you miss work, you get fired. If you get fired, you start to struggle more than you already are. They are keeping us barely awake on purpose. We are too tired and afraid to fight. Story 25. People of France believe protesting is a part and essential of their culture and history. Hence, they do it a lot. In America, people seem to have moved to voting or working through the system. Protests still happen, just not as frequently. Story 26. Lots of people have money and are comfortable. Just look at any vacation destination in the United States. They are all packed with people, even with heavily inflated prices. Story 27. Mass hopelessness. I give it another decade when people get so ground down because rent is $4,000 a month and groceries are $1,000 a week until people flip because they have nothing left to lose. Story 28. Do the French not care about being arrested or even injured in a protest? Do they not have jobs they would get fired from if their employers saw them on the 11 o'clock news rioting? Story 29. France is a comparatively small country with a lot of shared heritage and history. The United States is very large and spread out with very little shared heritage and history, which makes it harder to get everybody on the same side. Story 30. The layout of European cities is more conducive to big protests, in my opinion. American cities have parks and such, but it's not the same as those big central squares. Story 31. My current theory is that all Americans agree there's a problem, but they don't agree on the solution, sometimes even going in direct opposite directions on solutions. There's not really a point protesting if it's just going to devolve into, we need more government programs, versus, we need to cut government programs. Story 32. The French have made protesting an art form. Much like cursing, both are just done better in French. I think this goes back to when they chopped off some lady's head. Story 33. People are living paycheck to paycheck and we are all expendable. But I think, and I hope I am wrong, things will have to get worse for overdue change to take place. In comparison to the French, the United States does not have a strong tradition of protesting violently like the French, nor do they have social safety nets or a strong sense of nationality and community that bands them together against elites. External forces have done an excellent job of creating so much division that we have become afraid of engaging with those in our community to bind our sense of shared misery. We barely have time for ourselves outside of work, and we are exhausted. But until the day comes when a significant portion of the masses are economically displaced and take action, things will continue to get worse. Story 34. We have a culture of rugged independence and many people fear being seen as victims of injustice, especially by corporations. To protest is to acknowledge that America has problems. To protest is to admit you're being swindled and conned. That's why a majority of protesters are on the left. We are a nation of temporarily embarrassed millionaires, as John Steinbeck said. Story 35. Missing work is difficult for many people. A non-homogeneous population has diverse interests that don't align much and who often would rather see other segments of the population suffer. Take your pick. Story 36. The French view the central government as the way to achieve change, and Americans do not. The French national government is much more centralized. Broadly, conservatives would be happier in Texas, and progressives would be happier in California or New York. Story 37. We like to puff up and pretend the French are weak and we are tough, but it is going to get worse and we will vote for more of the same. Please prove me wrong. Story 38. The French remember the terrors. They know how bad it can get when untrammeled greed gets the bit in its teeth. If they can avoid another hard reset by taking part in some protests, everybody wins. The gilded gentry in America have yet to find out. All right, one guy found out. They really think the proles will just endure it quietly and then die. Forever. Story 39. We have jobs. And it doesn't matter because our leaders don't care about who we vote for. They have already fixed the system, so if we all protest, they just sit back in their mansions and laugh at us. Then they send in police officers who are armed like the military with literal military equipment, right before sending in the National Guard. Story 40. What did the French protests accomplish exactly? It just seems like the men enjoy being aggressive, and then everything continues as it was going to anyway. When was the last time a protest accomplished anything? And please don't say awareness. The internet brings significantly more awareness than a protest ever could. Story 41. What do these protests accomplish? It made the news and everyone cheered on the French for protesting the retirement age. The retirement age was raised in 2023 and nobody said anything in 2024. There is still an ongoing protest for farmers in France. There have been protests across the United States. The thing that the history books don't tell us is that at the end of the day, these protests don't really amount to much if there isn't a strategy behind them. Just being out on the streets and upset about something doesn't accomplish much. You have to actually have a strategy to change whatever you are protesting to be effective. Story 42. Am I the only one who thought the original poster was talking about the French Revolution? Like, obviously, getting out the guillotines is a bit too far, and there are too many police, military, and guns for violent revolution to work for the people in the modern day.